Today's conversation is one I think so many families need, but they don't even realize it yet. When most people hear the word Alzheimer's, they think fear, confusion, and loss and bad news. But what if there was a way to approach this journey differently, with more preparation or more structure, even some moments of joy along the way? Wouldn't that be nice? I'm Valerie Van De Zilver, and this is Always Ageless. Our guest today is Mark Wilson. He's written a powerful new book called Breakthrough Alzheimer's Care. We're going to talk about that. And what makes it so unique is not about just understanding Alzheimer's, which is so much what the books are about, but Mark's approach is actually what to do when that does happen, how to prepare your home, your systems, how to bring a sense of calm and dignity into what other people can find is so overwhelming. Mark, I'm glad you're here. Welcome, Mark Wilson, to Always Ageless.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm so grateful to be here. It's such a pleasure.
Mark, you've used the word breakthrough. What are some families not seeing or understanding about Alzheimer's care today?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I do now is I lead several Alzheimer's support groups, and people come to these meetings and they're just desperate. They know there's no cure for the disease, so they think they can't do anything. And the fact is, there are many, many, many small things that can be done that collectively can make a big difference for Alzheimer's patients. And I found those because I was determined to have my mom live much happier, much longer than her neurologist thought she would. And I researched, there's like dozens and dozens of little things that all make a little difference, but collectively they can help. And so there are things you can do. There's a plan that's in my book, and you don't have to be, helpless and feel like a victim. You can proactively do some things that will make a big difference if you do them kind of all of them together. And that makes you feel better as the family care leader and makes the patient live longer, healthier, and much happier, which is what's important. So,
That is important. And I know our listeners and our viewers are going to be anxious to hear about those steps. So, why do you think so many people feel unprepared when this diagnosis enters their life?
I think it's kind of natural because there's kind of quote unquote no cure. So you're desperate. The symptoms are very difficult to manage. Your loved one has changed. So there's grief involved with losing parts of your loved one while they're still alive, it's a very hard disease. But I think the idea is to kind of step back and say, okay, your loved one helped you. They love you. They, like my mom took care of me in a beautiful way forever, and now is my turn to take care of her. And I wanted her to be happy, and I wanted her to be at home, which I was determined to keep her home and figure out how to help her be happier and healthier. So that was my mission. So
So, let's step back and tell us about your beginning
sure.
before your Alzheimer's journey. Tell
Yeah.
us about who you are, what you've
Oh,
done. You have some
great.
great accomplishments.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was a leader in HR for many, many years. I was for over 22 years. I was leading leadership development, executive development, organization effectiveness, and training and recognition programs at Taco Bell at their corporate office in California forever. And then I was happy. I loved my job. I loved working for Taco Bell. But then my mom was showing some symptoms, and I was in a little bit of a denial. I thought, oh, she's, just entered her early 70s. It's kind of natural. But my sister is a little bit more direct than I am and said, no, no, we need to get her tested. There's something not right. So I went along, and sure enough, she had both Alzheimer's and vascular dementia.
Oh,
And I thought, okay, I don't know much about this, but I learned everything I could about caregiving and all this, and wanted to be at home. And I tried to keep working for 6, 9 months and take care of her at home. It was getting too hard because, as you all know, Alzheimer's gets slow and steady progression, progressively gets worse. So at some point, I went to my boss and said, "I'm sorry, I have to leave because I want to do the best for my mom at home." And my boss thought I'd lost my mind because I'm in the middle of a very successful executive career, and I was too young for early retirement or retirement. He said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." So I left my successful executive career at Taco Bell in HR in the middle of it to take care of my mom. And I had no regrets at all. It's one of the best decisions I've made because I worked hard to help her and she benefited in a big way. And there are lots and lots of, I call them moments of joy in throughout the book. And they were special. And there were special moments to help my mom, and she was very grateful. And well, I mean, we always got along great. So she went along with all these crazy ideas I had that were kind of quote unquote experimental to help her. And she knew I was trying to do the right thing, and it worked. It really helped her. So,
So, what happened? What led you personally to develop this approach to Alzheimer's care?
well, I didn't even know what the approach was. I was just like talking to experts. Working with executives, I was used to talking to leaders, and so I
Yes.
figured out who the strongest leaders were in the country in this field, and researched and read and just basically collected ideas. I mean, all the way from changing my mom's nutrition and eating pattern completely. I looked at a lot of supplements that are not fully FDA approved, but have some evidence that they would help. I and then of course when I tried the supplements, I wanted to make sure there's no side effects. So I start with a teeny tiny dose and then work my way up. And if there weren't bad side effects, I thought, okay, let's put that in the mix. And then I knew art and those kinds of programs I read helped. And so I had a whole art therapy program put together for my mom, cognitive stimulation, puzzles, things that move the brain. And then most importantly, after about a year of doing this full time myself, it was hard. And so I
Yes.
decided I needed some home caregiving help. And then that's where my HR lens kicked in. And
Yes.
I hired the best caregivers from several agencies that I worked with. That I mean, the agencies paid them whatever the average pay was, but I was so picky. I picked these amazing caregivers. I made a lot of mistakes, which I talk about in the book in the beginning, because I didn't know what caregiving was even looking like. But once I sort of honed in on what great caregiving looks like, I found the best caregivers, and then they were paid the same, but I figured out how to keep them and how to retain them and treated them like gold. And they never left. I had five full-time caregivers the last two-thirds of my mom's journey when she needed 24/7 supervision. And these five caregivers never left. They worked with me full-time from 5 to 9 years, depending on the person.
My
And
goodness.
they were paid sort of normal, but they loved working with me and my mom, and they felt special, and they helped me execute all these dozens of activities and actions that helped her. So
And you must imagine that or that those caregivers want to have an interesting job as well.
yeah, yeah,
They want to be in a place where they're appreciated, where it's interesting, where they can use what they consider to be their skills, because most caregivers actually want to take pride in their work, right?
totally.
They want to feel that they're making a contribution. So if you offered them an opportunity to be a part of that, that must have been inspiring for them as well.
You're spot on, Valerie, because it's so funny. I was very clear with them on the mission. The mission was to help my mom live happier, longer, and healthier, and they liked that mission. So they were motivated too,
Yes.
and they felt. And the other thing too, I learned a lot about recognition at Taco Bell. I led those programs, and retention, and so the things. I mean, a couple of little keys for listeners is one is be flexible on schedule. I learned that Taco Bell has lots of frontline employees, and that's one of the big retention factors if you can be flexible to their schedule. So I was very flexible. I said that when you want to work, we'll work anytime you want to work, and I'll figure it out. And I kind of balanced the scheduling and figured out how to plug the holes. And so flexibility was important. The other thing was important. They all had basic safety things in place, which was a criteria for selection. But I called it the magic part. The magic part was how do you make my mom feel great? The creativity, the fun, the humor, the love. They all kind of approach that a little differently, but with the same verve. And so when somebody had a good idea that I liked, I would tell them that I'm going to tell all the other caregivers about this idea. And so they were happy that their ideas were then spread throughout the whole care team. And so that was also a kind of a retention recognition thing. And then I would, every time when their family member would have a birthday or something, we would celebrate that with the caregiver. So they felt part of the family. And it's ironic because my mom's passed a couple of years ago, but we're still friends with all five of the caregivers. We're
Oh,
there, we
nice.
still see them and celebrate things together. So they're like part of our extended family. It's nice.
That's very nice. Those are very nice. So and I'd like to know when you ask them what kind of things were important to them. Did any of them have, other than their time off or money, which are always common threads with employees, and you know that better than any of us on this call, is that did any of them have any suggestions that you were either surprised at or that were very interesting to you?
No, they all had an interesting twist. I mean, they all had kind of their own personality brought to the table. So, just for example, there was one one of the caregivers that was so cute. When my mom would be in the bathroom, and they would like they she was just creative. She would make faces in the mirror, and my mom would make faces, but they would laugh and they would kind of just tease each other in the mirror. That was kind of a creative thing, but I could tell my mom loved it. Another one of our caregivers had a very strong faith, and they would. My mom lost her speech pretty early on. That was one of the first symptoms
Really?
that she couldn't talk. But she understood pretty well, and the caregivers got to know her so well that they knew what she was communicating. But one of our caregivers would pray with my mom, and you knew, even though my mom couldn't say anything, you knew that she knew these were important prayers, and she would just smile when Louisa was her name, when she would pray with Louisa. And it was so special to just see her beam from ear to ear. That would be an example of a joyful moment when I would see her just be so happy about something. So,
Certainly, and communication is so important.
yeah.
And one thing, Mark, and I know you've seen this, one thing is that I always fear that I'm going to be in a position where I can't communicate and the other people in my family or my room won't know it. They won't know that I can listen and I can hear
Right.
and that I want to communicate. And that's probably one of my biggest fears, is that what if I'm in that position and I want to tell them something and I
Yes.
want them to know what's in my mind. And don't you wonder if if that was your mom?
Yeah. No, I knew that she understood a lot. Which was interesting because in the book I talk about the five breakthrough care pillars, and one of the pillars is I call it positive, loving, caring, creative surround sound. So that the idea there is both the environment that you create for your loved one and the people who come in contact with have to
Yes.
be aligned with this fun, support, loving, caring environment. So what that means is the people have to respect her, they have to connect with her, whether it's a caregiver or a doctor or anybody that has contact with them. You, as a family care leader, you're not just a caregiver, you're a care leader, have to ensure that all these contacts are reinforcing. And once in a while, I would we would go to a doctor, for example, who just like because my mom couldn't talk, basically ignored my mom. And I could tell she didn't like that. Even
Yeah.
though she couldn't speak, she wanted to be respected and talked to and not talked around or over.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't happy with that. And if I didn't like a doctor, the good thing about living in a relatively urban area of Southern California is there's lots of doctors in all the specialties. So I wasn't afraid to fire a doctor who wasn't awesomely
Good for
easily to
you.
talk. You couldn't if you couldn't reach a doctor or took too long to schedule, they were out. Or if they didn't respect my mom, they were out. And so I had a really good team of not only just direct caregivers, but I called it the extended care team: doctors, physical therapists, all the people that helped my mom. So
And don't you think it's important that those people knew that you were on top of it? That I think some people think that the family, you just bring them into the doctor, you just sit there while the doctor does whatever he does and you
right,
leave and
yeah,
it's only an exercise for you, right? Okay, I've got to take my mom, just let her sit there. But when my dad was at the end of his life, I didn't know it at the time. I mean, I guess I kind of suspected it. Um, but he had to go into a small, what I call a group home. And now, mind you, my dad was 30 days before his 99th birthday. And I took him there and I sat down with him and I said, do not treat my dad like he's old. I
yeah,
don't want to come in here and see my dad sitting in a corner in a rocking chair with a bib on. Do not treat him like he's old. He's active. His mind is there. Everything is good. Do not treat my dad like an old man. Now, in retrospect, I think they probably were laughing inside. Sure, lady, your dad's 99 years old. But heck, my mom's 106. So who knows?
Yeah.
Right.
No,
But I think,
you're spot on. That's exactly how I felt. I mean, you needed to respect my mom. You
yes,
needed to treat her right. And I talk about this in the book. The doctors and other professionals that are on your extended care team, they work for you. You're the care leader. They work for you and for your loved one. Whether they think they do or not, they do. And so you have to kind of have that mindset. A lot of this care leadership that I kind of learned on the job is mindset. You have to think of yourself as empowered, think of yourself as the leader, and you have to kind of manage people in that way. So, for example, I would always go to these doctor's appointments with a pre-written list of questions, and I would actually hand the doctor the questions because a
which
lot
of
of these
course
doctors,
they absolutely love, right?
oh, they hate that. I call in my book, I call them, some doctors are speedsters. They like to just like whip in and out. And I talk
Yes,
about why that is. The insurance companies pay them, whether they take two
yes,
minutes or 10 minutes, the same. So anyway, there's lots of reasons for it. But I say you got to slow down the doctor so that you get all your questions answered and so that they're careful enough with the diagnosis and the treatment because they've thought it through because they're taking their time. So I have a list of questions and I say, hand the doctor the list and say, I want all these questions answered. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I haven't used this too often, but for the real speedster that wants to ignore your questions, I say, this is your backup. I say, when your loved one is, sitting there getting diagnosed or whatever, you slowly step in front of the door. And so you don't physically block them, but just standing in the door so they can't run out gives them a little bit of a subliminal message to slow down. I can't run out the door. So,
absolutely, absolutely. And that is our job as loved ones, as family members, as caregivers, as caretakers, as care companions. And I love your phrase, your term of care leader. I think that's so empowering and so powerful. We're going to have to start using that here. But I think, just the way I like to think I was with my dad, don't think that just because he's here and he's old, that you could treat him like he's old. He's not.
totally.
And,
Yeah.
and when we took my mom to assisted living community a couple of weeks ago, and she sat down with, and she's 106 and a half, and she sat down with that lady, and she said, I am not stupid. Don't treat me like I'm old.
Beautiful.
And you have to wonder if your mom and our loved ones who are going through that journey, if they don't hear and know some of those things, because we know, don't we, Mark, that there are moments when they are cognizant and when they know what's going on, when they hear. And what
Totally.
if that was a moment and we missed it and we treated them or said something negative that hurt them and we didn't know that that was that moment?
You're spot on. I'm not an expert at this, but I'm learning a lot through my support groups. I do some advocacy in Washington for Alzheimer's, but they know more than we think they do, but they can't express it because they often lose their speech. They have moments of confusion, but most of the time they actually kind of are more aware than we think they are. So,
A couple of weeks ago, we interviewed a wonderful gentleman named Marty Schreiber, and Marty wrote a book, talked about his journey with his caring for his wife, and they had a situation where they were in her assisted living community, her memory care community, and she was crying, and he said to her, Elaine, why are you crying? And she said, I am starting to love you as much as I loved my own husband. And so the thought that you can touch in hearts, although you may not have that exact communication, but your hearts still touch. And you
oh,
can't ever forget that with people.
no, you're so spot on. My mom would, with these caregivers that she ended up being, crazy in love with too. They would come in on a new shift, and they would like kiss each other and hug each other. I mean, to see that kind of joy and love, even though you're kind of deep in this horrible Alzheimer's disease, it's so special because you see them alive and happy and loving and being loved. It's a blessing, really.
It is. It is. And what if you don't want to pass any moment to just ignore them? That's so important. You mentioned, and I heard you say that we talked about it in the conversation, So I want to address this. You've mentioned that people encouraged you to write this book because of how practical your guidance is. What were you doing, and what was the situation you were in, and what was it that you talked about that at the end of your talk people said you should write a book?
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm kind of well connected with the UC Irvine's Alzheimer's Center, UCI Mind, they call it. I knew the director there. And anyway, after my mom passed, I was talking to her. I told her that my mom had passed, and she didn't really know the things that I did. But she said, what did you do that helped her? I listed some of them. And then she said, we have a podcast series called Spotlight on Care. Why don't you come and talk about some of these things? So I did 2 podcasts with them. And after each one, people came out of the woodwork and said, oh my gosh, you got some really good ideas. Because I talked about things like how do you lead the care teams and some of the HR kind of things applied to care, some of the practices I did on safety, some practices on, kind of cognitive stimulation. And anyway, so people kind of reached out to me and said, you should write a book. And it was like, I don't know how to write a book. I've never written a book. But one day I thought, well, maybe.
But we have AI now, which will help you. Yeah.
So I took some notes. The next day I took more notes and an outline. And like 8 months later, I had a draft of a book. So it's like,
Sure. And then, so what were some of those things that you talked about? You talked about safety. Let's talk about that. What did you talk about in those sessions that related to safety that's different than most people do?
Well, it's interesting because one of the premises of the book is that I'm kind of biased. I think home care is really good because people like the comfort of their home. But I understand some people can't keep their loved one at home for different reasons. But so one of the ideas is, in the general ideas in the book, is you can get any kind of care that you can in a facility at home. And people don't know this because I didn't know this. I was responsible for my grandmother's care way back when. She didn't have Alzheimer's, but she had a fall, and I just assumed that she had to be in a facility for physical therapy, but that's not true. You can get home physical therapy, you can get home doctors, home dentists, home haircut. I mean, everything that you get in a facility can be gotten at home. And actually, you can kind of get better people at home, and Medicare or whatever your insurance is will probably pay for all those services. But at home, you can make your home really safe. And some of the things that I did, again, not hard or expensive. I mean, little things like if you have a kindergartner or young kids, there are these play tiles that you have that are soft and they're like jigsaw that come together. You can get them on Amazon or Walmart, any place, and you put them on the floor. And so if there is a fall, my mom never fell because she had the best caregivers. But if there was a fall, you're safe because they're rubber tiles and they have some friction, and so it's much better than a hard floor. So I talked about that. I also talked about bathroom safety, how putting those little rails on there, which are not expensive, a raised toilet seat, some things like that, basic safety things. On the bed, you can put little half rails on there so that they don't fall. They don't fall in the middle of the night. Some motion sensors, which are cheap. Little things like that I talk about as just basic kind of safety things that can help a home, be a lot safer. So.
And people obviously responded to that, and we now have a book called Breakthrough Alzheimer's Care. Because a lot of the care books we see aren't really practical in the home how to do it.
Right.
They're more higher level, I would say, care, up here. But this is like down to earth, do one thing at a time. So we're going to be sure that we have it right here so our people can see it.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to write because it was like, okay, I kind of wrote it maybe a year after my mom passed, and it was like kind of refreshing some of the things. Because when you're in the middle of the journey, you don't think too much about it. But when you go back and you reflect, I go, "Ooh, that was a pretty good idea. How did I come up with that?" And I remembered I called somebody and got an idea. So,
yes.
And so kind of the 5 basic pillars, starts with self-care, because you can't be a good care leader if you're not strong and mentally in the right shape. And so self-care is the pillar number 1. And I talk a lot about internal sources of energy and external sources of energy for you, the care leader. The second one is safety, because the idea is that your loved one's not going to live longer and happier if they're not safe. So that's the second pillar is safety. The third one is your care team. So you have to have the finest care team ever to execute all these ideas at the highest level. and I talk about selection tools and coaching tools and things that I learned in corporate world applied to caregiving. So have the best, finest care team ever is number 3. 4 is all about nutrition and some supplements and some things to keep your kind of health. Um, and then 5, and the last one is this surround sound. How do you create the best supportive environment, whether it's the physical environment that you want to create at home, and then the people environment. Make sure everybody who has a touch point with your loved one is supportive, fun, caring, and loving, and no exceptions. And you as a care leader have to manage that environment so that that's always reinforcing positivity and fun and safety and all those things. So
And we touched on this, but certainly your background is so helpful. When people are interviewing someone, how do you know? You went through this at Taco Bell. You have thousands and thousands of front line people.
mhm.
How do you find the person who not only has the right attitude, but the work ethic? They're going to show up. They're going to do the right thing when they're on the job. They're going to stay clean. They're going to always care for 8 hours. They're going to care about how they look and come across to the customer.
Totally.
That's not easy.
No, no, not at all. No, it's so, and with care, it's so important. I basically say that like any job, and this all goes for doctors and caregivers both. You have poor doctors and caregivers. You have average poor doctors and caregivers. You have good ones, and then you have superstars. And you want only superstars on your team. So what do you look for? So I mean, to me, you know, dementia experience, whether you're a physician or a caregiver, is kind of baseline. So you want somebody who's
Okay.
dealt with dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever the form of dementia is important to you, and that's kind of a baseline. The other baseline for caregivers is safety. You ask them about, how do you keep your loved one, or how do you keep your clients safe? Talk about that, and that's something you have to. I always said, give them a trial shift. You don't hire them unless they go through a trial shift, and you watch them. How safe is your loved one? Do they, like my mom she walked, but she needed a walker just for security. So
Correct.
I wouldn't, if I watched them and they just like let her walk alone, I didn't like that. So I wanted them to like have one hand on my mom, one hand on the walker, and kind of guide her with her. Just because sometimes, even though you have a walker, you can trip, and so things like safety is baseline. And then the fun part was I would find out how they handle difficult situations. So for example, I hear this a lot, that sometimes dementia patients don't want to take a shower. They resist the water or things like that. So I say, okay, tell me about a difficult situation you had with one of your dementia patients, and they would like maybe cite one. If there was no difficult situations, I knew that wasn't true, because there's always something with Alzheimer's patients. So that was a lie. If they say, well, no, I didn't have any problems, they were out because they were not truthful. so
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so
They
whenever
weren't
they
paying attention, or they didn't last anywhere long enough.
Exactly. So if
Situation.
they cited a situation, but then if they were like, kind of pushy and bullying about that, I made them do that. I said, that's not right. So
No.
no, so they have to be creative about it. So there's a tactic in dementia care called diversion. So if they kind of changed the subject or diverted them away and then came back to that was a good thing. Like with my mom, if she didn't want to do something, our caregivers are smart enough. My mom was a kindergarten teacher forever, so she loved kids and stuff. So if they would like bring out stuffed animals and play kind of a fun game with her, and then she would distract it, and then she can come back and then do the thing that they wanted her to do that she didn't want to do. Then all of a sudden she wants to do it again. So a creative approach to difficult situations is also really important to ask in the interview and watch it. But then I would just make sure, if you give them a trial shift, have them work for a few hours and just watch them and see how they do. If they're safe and they have some fun with your loved one, or you see some glimpses of joy and connection, that's a good thing. Now, the other thing too I talk in my book is when to immediately fire a caregiver.
Yes.
And
I'm curious myself. Tell
yeah,
me.
oh yeah, no, these are the cases I talk about. One, and this happened one time. My mom did fall once, and it was because of the situation. I had a caregiver overnight, and my mom, she fell asleep on the job, and my mom got out of the bed and fell, and
Oh no.
she was okay. Thankfully, she kind of got a black eye, but she was fine. No broken bones, nothing. But it's so funny because I was like, anyway, so because the fall woke me up. There was a sound, and I ran. I was sleeping down the hall, so I ran in there, and sure enough, she had fallen, but she was okay. And this caregiver was so funny. She says, "Well, your mom was so fast, she kind of squished down the bed and got up quick." I said, "No, that can't be." So I looked at I for new caregivers, especially if overnight, I had a little camera, and I played the camera, and no, I could see that she was like snoring and was asleep. So I said, "Go home."
Um,
Right.
well,
So
that
that's
was a
one.
question I have
Yeah,
that I'm sure so many people wonder about, and I know we wondered ourselves when we wanted to have a caregiver for
yeah,
my mom. But I
yeah.
said, "How do you know who to trust?" During the day, it's not quite so terrible,
Right.
but at night, how do you know they're not
Yeah.
stealing from you or they're asleep?
Yeah.
So, do you use cameras? Is that
I
acceptable in
did.
a caregiving
I, I
situation?
it is, and I used it only for kind of new caregivers just to make sure. And then once I trusted them, then I wouldn't use it. But I think the law is basically you can use a camera so long as you're not in a private space. Like you can't use it in a bathroom that the caregiver goes in. You can't use it where they sleep if you have an overnight person sleeping there. But you can use it in any common caregiving space, and no problem. So I used it kind of for trial shifts, especially for. I didn't really use it in the daytime because I was around to watch. But at nighttime, when I tried to sleep a few hours, that's when I'd put it on. So that's fireable offense number one, sleeping on the job. Second one is, and this is more common, a lot of people, a little bit biased, younger people, they're on their cell phone all the time.
All the time.
And if your caregiver is not paying attention to your loved one because they're on the phone unnecessarily, and if there's an emergency, yeah, you got to make a call. But some people are on the phone all the time. It's like, no, fire them immediately. Go home. Right. So,
Those are the people that think that your mom or your loved one doesn't hear anything,
right.
doesn't know what's going on. They're old, and so I'm
Yeah.
just going to. We had the same situation when my dad passed away. I'm convinced I'll go to my grave believing that the caregiver wasn't watching him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was funny because
And
I remember one time I was watching a caregiver. My mom was trying to get the caregiver's attention to do something fun, like play or have, and she was like, I could tell she was trying to get her attention. The caregiver was just on her stupid phone, and so I said, "Go home. You're not going to be good enough for us." So,
spoken from the words of a HR manager, right?
exactly. So that's
Who
that's
writes
number two.
hiring
Yeah.
programs and knows how to implement them.
And the third one is if there's any kind of sense of either drug or alcohol use, send them
Oh,
home.
sure.
So this was funny. I found a caregiver that I really liked. She had a great first shift with my mom. The second shift, she comes in there and I could tell she was kind of out of it. And so I said, well, just go inside and do the laundry, which I usually wanted my caregivers to focus completely on my mom. And then my sister and I would do the tangential things like laundry and cooking and all that. But I said, no, go do the laundry and I'll take care of my mom. And then about half an hour, walked in there and she hadn't folded one thing. She was like sitting there like a zombie. And I said, what's wrong? She said, well, I'll be honest with you. Before I came, I was huffing, and I don't even know what huffing was, but I Googled it. Huffing is like smelling some stuff to get high. And so I said, go home. You can't be here if you're taking drugs or alcohol. So I
No,
said, go
yeah,
home.
no, that's one of the things we don't allow in this house, right?
Totally, yeah. So there's lots of, I mean, that's in the book. These are things that like no excuses. Don't give them a second chance. There's too many caregivers to choose from to put up with any of this stuff. So they just immediately send them home. So, so those are kind of things that are sort of HR applied to care leadership, if you will.
One of the things you mentioned, your fifth pillar, is surround sound. Let's talk about what does surround sound mean?
Yeah. Well, it means basically you want to create I call it, I learned this actually from a Taco Bell project. This is a funny kind of side story.
Tell
I was
us.
working with the head of marketing, and we had 13 stores in Tucson, Arizona that were experimental stores. And I brought in a consultant to help us with it. And he basically taught us about touch points. And touch points were, if you imagine what a customer smells, thinks about, hears about from the moment they see a Taco Bell and they drive up to it, to the experience, and then leaving, and they think every touch point has to support good service and good customer experience. So I kind of
Absolutely.
borrowed that idea and applied it to my mom's care. I thought, every touch point that my mom sees, experiences, needs to align with fun, love, compassionate, and safety, and all those things. So I thought about that, and I thought, okay, so safety, it's like every moment is a moment to either be dangerous or safe. And so I thought of safety as touch points. And then I thought about the environment, the fun part. It's like, okay, so like my mom was a kindergarten teacher. So we would surround her room with stuffed animals and fun pictures. And in fact, when we take her out on our walker, or sometimes we'd use our wheelchair if it was a long trip, and I would decorate her wheelchair and walker with stuffed animals and pictures and fun things. And so we would go out, and these kids would come up to her, and they would just love her wheelchair because it'd be all decked out with stuffed animals and fun things. And even though my mom couldn't talk, the joy of seeing these faces of kids having so much fun with interacting with her was great. So that's an example of a surround sound environment. Make the environment something that your loved one loves. My mom's case, it was kids and fun kindergarten type things. For your loved one, it might be different, but that's a
That's
physical
a
environment.
yeah, what a
Yeah.
beautiful idea. But that's also another example of, oh, we don't need to do any. It's interesting because you remind me of a moment when I first visited a wonderful memory care community in South Orange County. I won't mention their name, but I love that community. And the first time I went there, I remember I asked, which was really kind of a stupid question, now that I've been doing this for a while. And I said, What are you most proud of here?" And they said, "Our cooking, our chef." I said, "Really?" I said, "Because," and this just is my stupidity. I said, "Do your people really know, right? Do they notice?" They said, "Oh, absolutely." And and I felt they don't really have to because most of the people don't know, but they were really concerned about their meal presentation, and their chef is fabulous. We love going there for events, community events and industry events because they do such a great job of presentation of the food and the taste and the smell. And you remind me of that situation.
Yeah, it's so important. And the other things like in the environment where my mom would love to do these adult coloring books with colored pencils, and she would do that for hours, and it was really good for her mind too, because she had to make they call it executive decisions, decision making about what colors to use, and she was so precise. And again, she couldn't talk, but she would just see her smile when she did these pictures. And so, of course, when she would produce like she would go through a whole coloring book in like 2 days, and then we put these pictures all over the house, and like you would for a child, and she would love to see her work all over. So that's an example of sort of surround sound, fun support and all that. So I mean, why not, right? So
And that's all an experience, right? It's
yeah,
creating experiences. It's
totally.
Disneyland, right? That's what we do.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
create
why not?
experiences. You're right. You create experiences at Taco Bell, the color, the sound,
Right.
the
Yeah,
smell, right?
yeah,
The posters,
right.
the campaigns, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's amazing. Very fascinating. And that she recognized that and she noticed all of those things.
yeah. Oh yeah, big time.
And
And
when
in fact,
she'd color in those little
oh,
spaces.
she was very precise about coloring. I don't know how, I mean,
Really?
better than I did. It's so funny because once in a while I'd sit down with her and color with her. I mean, one time in particular I remember it was cute. She like see me coloring, and she would like push my hand away because I wasn't very good at it. And I could just hear her mind going, "I love you, son, but you're messing up my drawing, man."
It's like when I would sit down to play the piano, my dad would say, "Why don't you let your sister play?"
Exactly. So that's the physical environment, and the people environment is also important. Again, every touch point that you interface with your loved one has to be supportive, loving, creative. And if you have like grumpy Gus's come and talk to her or being rude to your loved one, don't allow it. Get rid of them. There's enough choices of professionals, and even like family or friends or relatives. They come in, they're not treating her well. Find coach them and say, hey, you gotta be this way with your loved one, because it's all part of the 360 surround sound environment you're trying to create, that's uplifting and fun. That's how your loved one's going to stay happy. That's how your loved one is going to stay positive and healthy, because we know there's a connection between body health and brain health, but there's also connection between emotional health and joy and longevity too. So this system kind of works to reinforce each other, and that's why this fifth pillar about environment, is as important as any of the other pillars.
So I think the subtitle for your book could be "How My Career in HR at Taco Bell Made Me a Better Caregiver." These are
Yeah, that's
fascinating,
not. Yeah, thanks.
fabulous suggestions. This is a great conversation. Thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for being
thank
here.
you. I love being here with you. It's so much fun.
Well, this won't be the only time because we have a lot to talk about. We're not even there yet, and we're
Good.
getting towards the end. So, so what's if a family comes to you? What's a simple thing they could implement right now? What could they do right now? And my head's just spinning. I'm thinking I need to go put bunny rabbits on my mom's walker this afternoon.
Well, it starts with mindset. I mean, I talk in the book about 4 mindset shifts that you have to have. I mean, the first mindset shift is shifting from thinking about caregiving as a burden and a difficulty to thinking of it as a privilege. You have an opportunity to make a huge positive difference in
Amen.
your loved one's life, and this is special. Alzheimer's patients don't live forever, and so capture this moment and make sure it's an opportunity and a privilege, not a burden. So that positive mindset will give you the empowerment you need. Second is don't think of yourself as a caregiver, a supporter, but think of yourself as a care leader. Because leaders make things happen. They're not victims. They are creating the future, not victims of the future. So that's another. So the mindset is number one, and having that positivity and focus, and knowing that you can make a difference with all these actions, and then you kind of work through that. How do you keep yourself energized? Make sure you're taking care of yourself, because if you're no good as a care leader, your loved one is not going to do any better. They're not going to be happy. They're not going to live longer and healthier. So it starts with you as a caregiver, and then safety is important. If your loved one's in a facility, watch for all the safety things, or if you're at home, create those safety things. Things like the flooring. Okay, if your flooring is hard flooring and there's a fall, it's really devastating. So make sure the flooring is good. Make sure there are rails to hold on to, and the caregivers, whether at home or a facility, or you, are always aware of safety, holding on to your loved one, because even if they can walk, loved ones, Alzheimer's patients can shuffle and lose their footing, and so safety is because again, no happiness and longevity or health are going to happen if they're not safe. So those are things. And then, of course, work on nutrition, because there's a lot of research that shows that positive nutrition, vegetables, not a lot of processed food, junk food, can not only help you avoid getting dementia, but there's a lot of research that shows it'll slow dementia down and Alzheimer's down if you change your diet to this much healthier kind of quote unquote Mediterranean-like diet. And so that's another thing to watch for. And of course, Alzheimer's patients can also choke because they lose some of their ability to swallow. So one of the things I really did is I took all these nutrition things and made sure that they were easily swallowable, because that's another part of safety. Because if they choke and they get aspiration pneumonia, then you're in the hospital and you got other problems in the hospital. So
Definitely not a good thing.
no. So those
Definitely
are
not
kind
a
of
good
some
thing.
starting points, and then be as picky as hell on your care team. So I mean, don't be afraid to be picky. Because there's lots of agencies out there that have lots and lots of caregivers, and if your loved one's in a facility and you're not happy with the caregiver, tell the director, or you can. I know of a lot of facilities, people bring in their own private caregivers to supplement the care team that's there, because sometimes the ratio of caregivers to patients is not good in some of these facilities. So,
I know, and what brings all of this kind of to my mind, and it's important to our listeners and our viewers, is not everyone listening to this program may have an older relative or someone loved one in their life who has Alzheimer's. I don't. I have an older person in my life who doesn't have Alzheimer's, but I'm listening to these things, and they're all things that I can apply to her as well. For example, the mental stimulation, the care people. She does have people who are around her who it's important that they have a good attitude and that they treat her with respect. Um, with our mindset, I actually wrote a prayer which I'll put up tomorrow because I realize how blessed we are when we have older parents with us. For a long time, it seems, so much of the time, it seems like a burden. But how many of my friends say, "You're so blessed, you're so blessed." And someone said, "Valerie, I never heard anyone say, 'I wish my parents had died sooner.'" They all say, "I wish they had lived longer."
No,
So whether,
that's a great mindset.
isn't it? So whether they're great, whether they have Alzheimer's or they're not, when I tie her shoes at her age and I button her sweater and I cut her meat at night, she doesn't want to be old either. They don't want to be like this. So I think these things, it's important that these things you're talking about aren't just for someone who has Alzheimer's, although that's the purpose of your book, but
No,
should be
you're
for
right.
everyone.
You're totally right. I'd say 90+% of what I talk about is applicable to any kind of caregiving situation. And the mindset is where it starts. Because if you're looking at this as, and this is normal, why me? I'm a victim. My loved one's a victim. And then if that's your mindset, you're not going to be empowered. You're not going to take control of your care team, your doctors, and all that stuff. You're just going to like go with the flow, which it's not going to help your loved one, and it's not going to help you either have the right mindset. So what you say, Valerie, is so important. It's a blessing. And there's a Catholic theologian writer whose name is Matthew Kelly, who talks about holy moments, and usually holy moments are when you're helping somebody else, and there's lots of holy moments when you're taking care of a loved one that really needs care. So
Yes. That, what a great thought, a holy moment. That's so true. Thank you for sharing that. So you have so many routines and systems that you put into place. Is there anything, Mark, is it possible that you could have thought of anything that after your mom passed, you say, "I wish I would have thought of this, or I wish I would have done this differently"? Is there
yes,
anything like that?
absolutely. Not about kind of my care system that I talk about in the book, but um, my mom actually might have even though she lived almost 3 times longer than she thought, she might have even lived longer, but for a medical mistake at the end of her life. She was in the
Uh-oh.
hospital. I won't go into all the detail; it takes too long. But basically, I underestimated her ability to recover after a brief bout of pneumonia that she was getting better on. And so I kind of authorized a little procedure that was done in the hospital that ended up being a medical mistake, medical negligence, malpractice, whatever you want to say. And it basically killed her in the hospital. And so if I had to do it again, I would have not done little this minor little surgery and trusted that she would have gotten better on her own with her great caregiving help at home. And that was a big mistake. I'm very, very regretting of authorizing that care. So
But we don't know.
we don't know. I mean, you don't
We don't
know that
know.
the doctor. I mean, doctors again, they're like all workers. There's poor ones, good ones, great ones. I had a poor surgeon in the hospital. It was not a big surgery, a little minor treatment, but he totally messed it up and killed her basically.
How very sad. So if you're talking to someone who's just starting this journey, what would you tell them to focus on first?
That's a great question. Well, first, your own attitude. I think staying positive, staying focused, thinking. Part of that is thinking of yourself as a care leader. That's the most important thing. And then coming up with kind of an approach. Again, safety is number two. Make sure your loved one is safe, whether they're home or in a facility. And if they're not, make those changes immediately, because safety, nothing good happens if your loved one's not safe. And then, then kind of work through the other pillars of my book, which are around nutrition, the environment you're creating, and finding just super duper care team members. And if a care if a direct caregiver is not great and having a wonderful relationship with your loved one and having fun and being safe, fire them. So, and that goes with doctors too. If your doctor, is not giving you the time to answer all your questions, or you feel like they're short shrifting you or not solving a problem that medical problem your loved one has immediately, fire them. There's lots of doctors out there to choose from. So that's the care team part. So that's what I'd start with.
One of the questions that we hear so often as we talk to people and we meet people is when you find a couple where one of them it's the mother or the father-in-law, and they say, I didn't marry you for this. We are ready to retire. And now, Mark, because people live so much longer, like in our case, we've got my mom and my husband saying, when are we going to travel? What are we going to do? So how do you talk to people who face the issue of they don't know, the unknown? How long is this going to last? Is this something it's going to last forever? How do you talk to those people? What do you say to them to give them some hope and some joy that this might not ruin their whole life, so to speak? Because isn't that kind of what they're afraid of?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Actually, again, I lead a couple of these support groups right now, and it's very common for a loved one to come to a group and basically say, my husband or wife has dementia, and we had all these plans, and now we can't do it, and it is devastating. I get that, because their life has totally changed. But again, maybe I'm naive about this, but love is sacrifice. Love is maybe love when you don't have to make any sacrifices, but the real test of love is sacrificing. And when you take care of a husband or wife who has dementia or another illness, and you're not living the life in your mind, your picture of what the marriage was, that's sacrifice. And so that is love. Love is sacrifice. And if you think of it that way and reframe it in your mind, that's the only way to deal with it. That's just my own kind of philosophy and ethics and morality, but I think that's if you don't not willing to sacrifice, you may really not love that person as much as you think, because they need you now more than they ever did, and step up,
And what if it was the other way around?
yeah, exactly. The other way around. Well, that was kind of with my mom was the same way. I always thought that if I was really sick, there's no doubt my mom was okay. She would help me and do anything it took. She when she worked two jobs and had time for me, and I don't know how she did it, but she sacrificed, and that's what love is about. So that's the mindset to change that. But yeah, no, I had one lady in one of my support groups. She basically kind of said, "Hey, my loved one's suffering. I'm suffering because of it. I hope he dies." And as a professional facilitator, I knew I wasn't allowed to like scream over and choke this lady, but
No,
that's what
you
I felt
can't
like.
do
I was
that.
like, come on. You're married to this guy. Yeah, it's hard, but come on, you love this person, do it. Yeah, so
Jay Leno has been one of the best examples of this. I don't know if you've seen him recently. His wife has Alzheimer's and he cares for her. And people have asked him, do you think about having another wife or whatever? He said, this is my wife.
right,
This is my job. I care for her because I love her. I married her because I love her. And this is my job. This is what I do. It would never occur to him to do anything else. And when I listen to that, it's so meaningful
exactly. You're
that he's
spot on.
thought of
You're
that.
spot on, Valerie. And that's what love's about, is often sacrifice. So,
It is. It is. Mark, thank you so much for the time you've given us
oh, I
today
loved it.
and your
Thank you for.
amazing thoughts. And I want to be sure we're going to put this on our YouTube channel. And for anyone who needs to know, I would love to have you come back. I hope you will.
I would love
And
it. I
I'd
would
love
love
for
it.
have you speak at some of our community workshops here in Orange County.
Sign me up.
And we'll pass your information around to our team.
This is my new mission, to help people who are struggling with this
And,
horrible
and
disease and caregivers. So sign me up for all that. I love it.
we will do that. We will do that. And for our viewers and our listeners, come back again next week for another episode of Always Ageless, where we want to be sure that you know that aging is not decline, but it's fun and there's joy and we want you to live bold and live old. Thank you.
I
Come
love it.
back again next week. Bye.
All
Thank
right.
you, Mark, very much.
Thank you, Valerie.